as we kind of mentioned before as well, is that they're both powerhouses. There are so many different levels of play in the game, and being able to have the face of your team kind of just be so strong, it really brings out a lot of innovation, I think, in team building for both of these players.
And I think that's a real key in these team formats where you're only playing one best of 3 a week, and so you get to kind of look at what your opponents used, kind of figure out what they like to bring, and see if you can counter team. And I think actually both China and Japan, as countries that are just both countries that are really good team builders. Japan always comes out with crazy things, and China kind of has their own sort of grassroots format and metagame where they're playing up against themselves, and of course on the worldwide stage as well, on the more sort of global online tournaments. But they always bring something slightly different, slightly unique, and certainly something with their own stamp on it.
Yeah, and as you kind of mentioned before, we will be able to see some of their team decisions from both sides here. Something like that Gastrodon here from Mao's end, kind of how you mentioned in last game, where Gastrodon is a lot better in these team leagues, where it really has the opportunity to shine, where it might not be as consistent in something like a Swiss tournament, but in these matches where you have to play once for the week and that's it, Gastrodon really shines, and we saw last game and how that yawn pressure really did a lot.
Yeah, yawn pressure again on the field here for Mao. We'll have to have a look at a little bit further into the matchup to decide on whether or not that comes into the fore. But a couple of other little notes that I want to just point out here on Mao's team. Substitute Icy Wind on the Flutter Mane, not a set that we see particularly often, and that Iron Hands dropping the Heavy Slam in favour of the Volt Switch, just really prioritising the momentum gain rather than the Heavy Slam damage.
I think Mao also focusing a lot on kind of setting up both the King Gambit and Ogerpon, which both have that Swords Dance, allowing with the fake out and guaranteeing you pivot out with the Volt Switch, recycling those yawns, those fake outs, and something like the Icy Wind from Fluttermane really supports the team well, I think.
And certainly a trainer like Mao that's got top 4 at Worlds, top 32 in the Global Challenge, top 32 in the Welcome to Paldea Tour, one of the early grassroots tours that we had in the format. And getting top 32 at Japanese Nationals in 2019 is definitely nothing to shake a stick at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited to see how Mao's matchup into Yuxiang's team is going to look. If we want to take a look there.
Yeah, I mean, Mao is a trainer, as we said, like a lot of the Chinese players tend to play in a lot of the grassroots, both worldwide and China organised tournaments. So 3-time Jolly Balloon champion there. And you know what? I don't know the size of that tour, Tyson, but I love the name of that. It was such a scary Pokemon to be facing down as well. But also a World Cup competitor in 2022 and 2021 season, so no stranger to playing in the World Cup. And of course China have had such a great run over the past couple of years that Yuxiang is definitely one of the reasons that China has done well.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. And Yuxiang here showing their skills as a team builder as well, with a lot of interesting options here, like the Citrus Berry on Rillaboom, which we kind of have seen not really used a lot of. We usually see something like the Miracle Seed or the Assault Vest on the Rillaboom. So the Citrus Berry may be coming up for something that we don't know, but could be super vital in this matchup, I think.
Certainly, and with the leftovers on the Golden Go and being able to have that sort of defensive backbone, these trainers, certainly Yuxiang will be really looking for those opportunities to set that Golden Go up, switch around that Rillaboom, take some hits, and use it in combination with that Iron Hands as well. Looking at this, there's only the Iron Bundle that's going to be setting up speed control, but that Rillaboom and Ogerpon will be able to use that Grassy Glide.
And I think something like the Golden Go is super good on paper here, considering Mao's Fluttermane, remember, doesn't have that Shadow Ball. So Golden Go looks really good here, just on paper, if it can get around something like the Ogerpon and King Gambit, which with that Terra Dragon is able to do.
Absolutely. We'll have to see how these trainers lead up into this particular matchup, as I think we're ready to get started on our first game of this set between Wang Yuxiang and Mao Harada. And it's looking like the game will be coming in just a second. Apologies, everyone. Looking back, we're getting the game set up now. So, just looking again. I mean, you mentioned about the Golden Go getting that nasty plot getting set up, and of course that matchup with the Fluttermane there. Tyson, is there anything else that you're seeing in this matchup that could make a really big difference?
Well, I think from both teams, as we kind of mentioned before, they both have two Pokemon with setup, that being the Golden Go and Ogerpon for Yuxiang here, and for Mao, the Kingambit and the Ogerpon. I'm really interested to see how both of these Pokemon are going to be positioned in both these games, but we are finally going to be able to jump into our game one with Yuxiang Wang and Mao Harada. And we are going to see Golden Go Iron Hands, a pretty normal lead here I expected from Yuxiang, and a Landorus and Iron Hands from Mao's side.
Yeah, we're seeing the game from Mao's perspective here. That Golden Go is really looking in probably the toughest position that you could see it in this particular matchup between these two trainers, where Landorus and Kingambit are the two real damage-dealing Pokemon that Mao has to deal with that Golden Go. And of course, if Golden Go does go for its Terra Fairy, then in the late game, that Fluttermane on Mao's side of the field will be able to put a lot of pressure on it as well. So really, I think this is a situation where Yuxiang's got to be thinking like, hey, how do I get into a position where I can get that Golden Go set up, maybe utilize the double fake outs and get a nasty plot off a little bit later on. Mao, on the other hand, has got to be thinking like, hey, how do I stop that from doing exactly what it wants to do in this matchup?
Yeah, exactly. And we do see a fake out there from the Iron Hands and a nasty plot from this Golden Go, just capitalizing on the fact that the Iron Hands is most likely going to go for a Wild Charge. Doesn't bring it to a little over half. That's very important for Mao to realize here with the Wild Charge. And that Leftovers just starting to give the Golden Go lots of the passive recovery that we're going to hopefully see throughout this match.
I really like the Wild Charge in there because you need to get some damage down onto that Golden Go. I wouldn't be surprised if Mao had also locked in a Stomping Tantrum just to make sure that Golden Go wasn't at full health. And yeah, I mean, you call out the Leftovers bringing its health back slowly but surely. And of course, that's going to help with the grassy terrain that's potentially in the back there for Yuxiang. But if Mao's able to do a lot of damage quickly to this Golden Go, it might not be able to get off those Make It Rains that it really wants to be able to achieve.
But instead of a Stomping Tantrum, we are going to see Mao opt for a Kingambit switch, and actually a double switch, a Kingambit, and I believe this was the Ogerpon, or Gastron, excuse me, coming in here to prevent this Golden Go from really getting set up more. I think what Mao's doing a great job of doing is pressuring this Golden Go with super effective moves, that being the Kowtow and something like the Earth Power in this Golden Go. But Lander is coming in from Yuxiang's side, giving that Kingambit actually a Defiant boost.
Yeah, getting that Kingambit nice and set up there. And I think, importantly, that Mao's brought 3 Pokemon to this matchup that don't take any damage whatsoever resist the big Make It Rains that Yuxiang can go for. So Yuxiang kind of has a great position with the Golden Go set up, but at the same time is sort of struggling to do too much damage, where you have to kind of lock into Shadow Ball to do one bit of damage at a time, where you really do want that Make It Rain to be the most effective thing that Golden Go can do. Landorus coming in here does activate the Kingambit's Defiant, but it also puts pressure onto that Kingambit, and so Kingambit's got to be a little bit careful here of how it acts, because if it does go for that Terra Dark to increase the damage for its Sucker Punch to maybe knock out that Landorus, then it's going to be taking a lot more damage from the Golden Go's Make It Rain.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are just going to see a Sucker Punch just knock out the Golden Go. I was going to say, you don't even need the Terrestrialization Dark, and this Kingambit is actually opting for Terra Fire, so you don't get Will-O-Wisp and things like that. But you don't even need the Terrestrialization Dark in that situation, because you do have the +1 from the Landorus. Even with something like Terra Dragon on the Golden Go, it just is not enough to stop Black Glass's King Gambit. It does so much damage, and the fact that Golden Goat took damage from the Wild Charge from hands before, I think Mao was very confident in that Sucker Punch KOing anyways. We did see a Yawn come from the Gastrodon into that Landorus, forcing it to pivot out, so it can't stopping Tantrum into something like the King Gambit, and this King Gambit is able to go for something like a Terrestrialization Fire, and maybe even go for a Swords Dance if it wants to force the Iron Hands to go for something like a Fake Out into you.
And of course, now it depends if Mao wants to take advantage of that position by, say, maybe going for a Kowtow Cleave into the Landorus slot and doing big damage into whatever Yuxiang has in the back. With the Iron Hands coming in, though, for Yuxiang's side of the field, it's going to be able to put some fake out pressure on this turn, but with that Gastrodon just consistently being able to put on that Yawn pressure, it's really down to Yuxiang to find a way to weave in those attacks like we saw in the last match between Renzo and Adam, where the Gastrodon's really not in a threatened position right now.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, we are going to see a Kowtow Cleave be locked in on Mao's side here. It's really up to the Iron Hands and what it wants to lock in. We do see the booster energy, most likely speed there on the Iron Bundle. No confusing Fluttermanes this time. A Terrestrialization coming out from that King Gambit Terrifier, just so it's not the 4 times weak to something like the Drain Punch from the Iron Hands. And if this Kowtow is able to go off into the Iron Bundle, at +1, it's going to be doing a lot of damage. We do see a Fake Out go off into the Gastrodon, actually proccing the Citrus Berry as well, which is super big for recovery on that Gastrodon.
Kind of healing it at the same time there for Mao, so probably a better position for him to be in. And the King Gambit does not get the KO onto the Iron Bundle with that Kowtow Cleave, so the Landorus is kind of caught in the back. It's really difficult for Yuxiang to be able to switch, because either Pokemon switching out to that Landorus is going to proc that Defiant ability once again and power up that King Gambit, but at the same time, Yuxiang wants to have that Landorus on the field to be able to launch out the ground type moves into the King Gambit that are the only thing currently on the field that really threaten any damage at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult position, especially since Yuxiang has something like the Iron Bundle attack. You aren't even able to go for something like a Hydro Pump into the King Gambit just because of the Storm Drain on Gastrodon. And something like a Freeze Dry isn't viable either because of Sucker Punch. So your best bet is that Wild Charge from that Iron Hands just to chip down this this King Gambit and hope that you're able to get your Lando in, and then this Gastrodon, you get the lowest amount of sleep turns possible, and you're able to fire off boosted Stomping Tantrums.
I think the trouble here is, from Yuxiang's side of the field, is that Yawn goes off, and the Iron Hands is going to be falling asleep next turn, and not this turn. And so Mao has this kind of really quite simple turn here, where you just double protect, make sure that the Iron Hands is asleep, and on its guaranteed turn of sleep, you can go for an attack with that King Gambit. That Landorus on both sides is carrying a Choice Scarf, so we know that that Landorus is going to be locked into an offensive move next turn. And with Black Glasses, 2 stages of increased attack and the Sucker Punch on with the same type of attack bonus from that King Gambit, that Landorus really doesn't have any opportunity without Terror available to it whatsoever to be able to really do anything this turn.
Yeah, and we do see a forfeit there from Yuxiang, realizing how the endgame is going to play out. Curious to see if they're going to change their game plan or kind of keep it up in this game too, as we do jump into that.
Well, we'll have to see. Game 2 is ready to go, and we'll have to see, because, like, oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, wow.
We've got a bit of a switch up coming out. Both traders switching it up completely here. Gastrodon Landorus coming out for Mao, but it's going to be that Iron Bundle in the lead with that Fire-type Ogerpon.
Yeah, a huge switch from both ends here. I'm very curious of what both of these trainers' game plans are going to be going into this game. Iron Bundle looking a lot better considering there's no Iron Hands pressuring it down with a Fake Out and is able to go for a Freeze Dry into both of these targets for super effective damage.
I mean, it's going to have to be the choice of Terror or the choice of Switch there coming out from Mao. And I think it's the first time in this set so far we've really seen Mao properly on the back foot, at least as far as damage goes. But you know, it depends on how this turn shakes out, because the Gastrodon's under threat, of course, as well from that grass type coverage from Yuxiang's Grassy Glide on the Ogerpon, and so without any water type moves to speak of. There's like not really any need for the Iron Bundle to go for a water type move in this situation. That Gastrodon's not looking as strong as it usually does.
Yeah, we see the Ogerpon come in here for that Landorus, saving that Intimidate for something like the Ogerpon or even the Iron Hands in the back. I think Yuxiang here is in an amazing position. We do see the Terrestrialization Fire on the Gastron here, knowing that if you switch in King Gambit, just because of the threat of the Ivy Cudgel from the opposing Ogerpon on Yuxiang's side, you are kind of forced to Terrestrialize your Gastron, otherwise you do eat a potential Freeze Dry and Ivy Cudgel. Instead, we see the Freeze Dry onto the Landorus line and Ivy Cudgel go into that slot, not KOing. Very important there for Yuxiang.
And a big yawn coming out onto this Iron Bundle, but I think Yuxiang really taking advantage of that offensive position that he's in this situation where Landorus can't go for the protect, and therefore you're okay to target 2 attacks into the slot that isn't Gastrodon. One of the things that Gastrodon does really well is put pressure onto the board, but it does that over time. It's not one of those threats that you really need to target down urgently every single time. Sometimes you can just leave it on the field for a few turns and deal with it later, and I think that way that Yuxiang's playing that is really, really effective.
And I think the way Mao also kind of positioned that yawn, realizing the correct target was Iron Bundle, threatening with those freeze dries into something like the Landorus is super, super well. Yuxiang actually opting to keep in the Iron Bundle, saying that it's okay, that if I knock out your Ogerpon, I'll go to sleep. That's a fair trade to me. And we see a Swords Dance come out from Yuxiang as well.
Swords Dance getting that Ogerpon to 1 stage of increased attack after the Intimidate from turn 1 from that Landorus, and an Ice Beam doing really very low damage into that Iron Bundle. Mao probably reading a switch out there, but you called it out, like I really like that Iron Bundle staying in this turn. It's a Pokemon that's really quite capable defensively, and with the defensive nature of physical offensive nature of Mao's team, it can probably hang on the field for a couple of turns and just wait out that yawn. In contrast, that does mean that Mao has a really easy target to go for a yawn because that Iron Bundle is going to be asleep, and so maybe Yuxiang cutting away options for this next couple of turns could come back to bite him, but at the moment it's looking quite good.
And what's very interesting here now is that Mao has spent their Terrestrialization on the Gastron, so the Landorus isn't able to go for a super effective Terra Blast into this Ogerpon. So even though you do get an Intimidate off into the Yuxiang's Ogerpon, it's still at +1, and Ivy Cudgel will be hurting a lot. And especially with a critical hit, I wouldn't be surprised if it was doing at least half to the Gastrodon.
And of course, you've got to be looking at that Landorus slot, because the Landorus isn't able to go for that Terra Flying that you called out. It's going to have to instead go for moves like Rock Slide, Stomping Tantrum that really aren't going to pick up a knockout onto this Ogerpon. Even if the Ogerpon isn't able to knock out the Landorus this turn, it's going to be able to do quite a bit of damage, but also if that Landorus decides to U-turn in, whatever's in the back for Mao is also going to be able to potentially take a lot of damage.
And Yuxiang here swapping the Landorus in for the Iron Bundle, not even giving Iron Bundle the chance to tick down a turn of sleep. The Gastrodon from Mao's side also switching into that King Gambit. Luckily, after the Landorus this time, so it is not going to get the Defiant boost. And we do see a Spiky Shield from Yuxiang there.
And a U-turn coming out from the Landorus on Mao's side into the now Landorus on Yuxiang's side. So again, another battle where the Landorus is not falling for anything this turn, just going for the U-turn on the Pokemon that can't protect itself, making sure that you get that positive momentum on the switch in.
Yeah, and I think this is you don't have a choice, obviously, what to switch in here. The Gastrodon is coming in. It's a matter of what Mao wants to prioritize, because the Bundle is asleep, so if you do yawn the wrong slot, Bundle could just switch in as a defensive pivot for something like that Landorus, even though you don't want to switch it back into the King Gambit. I think if you do switch Landorus out into something like the Bundle and preserve Landorus for Mao's Landorus, you're in a fine position. Your Landorus could also stay in and go for a Stomping Tantrum. Yuxiang is kind of in the driver's seat and has so much pressure with this +1 Ogerpon. Mao really has to play these next turns very carefully.
Well, actually, with a couple of Intimidates, I think that Ogerpon's now down to neutral stage of attack, so not quite as threatening, but certainly with this other Intimidate that can launch out onto the field from Mao's side with that Landorus that can come in, getting yet another Intimidate down onto the Ogerpon is going to be big here.
Yeah, absolutely, and we do see that Landorus coming for the Gastron, opting for a Yawn this time around, and a Terastallization, I believe, from Yuxiang's side into what seems to be the Ogerpon going for Terra Fire, so saying that you can intimidate me, but I don't need Swords Dance either. I have my Terastallization that gives me a +1 on my attack as well.
Any opportunity to raise your attack is a good opportunity for Half Flame Ogerpon there. And of course, increasing the damage that it's going to be doing with that Ivy Cudgel as well. It looks like an Ivy Cudgel is going to launch into Mao's side of the field, and it is going to be into that King Gambit. It's going to be a one-hit knockout with a critical hit. That Pokemon that did so much work in game 1 is taken out in one hit.
And being able to knock it out, not that you need the critical hit or anything, but being able to, like you said, remove the threat that kind of destroyed you game 1 is super impactful, and I think Yuxiang being able to switch in that Landorus without getting the attack buff on the King Gambit with the Defiant is super big. Your Gastrodon is going to come in here, and you do have the Citrus Berry, so you are able to kind of wall this Ogerpon, and now that it's Terastallized, you can threaten it with super effective Earth Power damage.
And the super effective Ice Beam damage on the Landorus on Yuxiang's side of the field, but I feel like the damage has kind of already been done, where Yuxiang still has all 4 Pokemon left to his side of the field and has the ability to switch and pivot around, whereas Mao has to kind of finish this game with the Pokemon that are left on the field, with Gastrodon and a Landorus that's locked in, or going to be locked into a single move. But once Mao is locked in that move for the Landorus, it's going to be really telegraphing how Yuxiang is going to be able to play around it, because with the combination of Intimidates and the ability to, as we said, switch around the board state in this situation, there's a lot of work that Yuxiang's going to be able to do to stop this Landorus from doing anything and make sure that Gastrodon is kept under check.
And Yuxiang is able to play super safe here, just going for a Spiky Shield and a Stomping Tantrum into the Gastrodon. Oh, wow, almost knocking out that Gastrodon, being that it's Terra Fire now, taking super effective damage from that Stomping Tantrum. It does get that Citrus Berry, but as you kind of said before, Mao's game 1 game plan was switching around a lot and getting positioning correct. But when you're down your last 2 Pokemon, it's a little difficult to do that. We are going to see a Ice Beam and a Rock Slide go off and knock out that Landorus, but as you said, the damage has been done.
Yeah, so like, there's the Iron Bundle in the back that's taken, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Tyson, 1 turn of guaranteed sleep already, and so could wake up a little bit later on. Instead, we're seeing the Rillaboom coming out, the reveal of the last Pokemon for Yuxiang's side of the field. It's going to be kind of helpful for the Gastrodon, kind of keeping it around for Mal's side of the field, but I think Yuxiang having the opportunity to go for that fake out and go for Ivy Cudgels and Grassy Glides into Landorus on Mal's side of the field over the next couple of turns will put that Gastrodon in a spot where it's got to do too much work to be able to win the match.
There is a world where Mao is able to just get every turn correctly and heal up with this grassy terrain that Rillaboom has provided for it. But as you said, it's a very uphill battle. Something like Earth Power with a critical hit could maybe KO the Ogerpon. We see Mao kind of taking their time and thinking about what they want to do in a potential game 3. The fake out Ivy Cudgel here from Ogerpon, it just makes the most sense. And as you said, but even if it doesn't knock out, something like the Grassy Glide from Rillaboom will just be able to pick it up next turn.
Yeah, so Ice Beam is in reply for that Gastrodon, doing less than half damage to that Rillaboom. And I think that's quite telling. If the Ice Beam was able to do maybe more than half, or taking into account those grassy terrain turns, with the recovery from the grassy terrain, maybe Mao had a little bit of a line into the game where the Iron Bundle stays asleep for a little bit. It can't really do too much damage. You can get an Earth Power later, but as it stands, the Rillaboom's going to be able to get that Grassy Glide, knocking out the Landorus. It's going to be a follow-up from the Ogerpon into this Gastrodon.
Yeah, and this is just Ivy Cudgel. Again, there's no reason to get fancy and click Sword Stance. You get, as long as you just damage this Gastrodon, you're outpacing it with 3 Pokemon, excuse me. The Earth Power, with a critical hit, maybe would have been able to knock out the Ogerpon. This Rillaboom, too, we can't forget, also has Citrus Berries, so even if the terrain was somehow miraculously stalled, the Ice Beam would have procced the Citrus Berry, and this Rillaboom between Woodhammer and the Ivy Cudgel from Ogerpon would have just been enough HP to knock out this Gastrodon.
So, it looks like we're going to one game to each of these players. What are you thinking now, Tyson, like looking at adjustments for both of them going into a game 3?
I'm really interested that Mao hasn't brought Iron Hands to the second game, and I think they'll most likely bring it to a game 3. I think Fake Out would have been super impactful here, even though you would have been outsped by something like the Rillaboom. Being able to pressure and maybe a Force of Terra in the same way that Yuxiang did to Mao, you could force maybe something like a Terrestrialization Ghost on the Iron Bundle so that it's not as threatening to turn 1.
That's a really good potential there, because really difficult for Mao to get into the game without that support there. As we see the Ivy Cudgel coming into that Gastrodon is going to be picking up the knockout. Yuxiang bringing this 1 game apiece, and we're going into a game 3.
And with a big change like that in that game 2 that we kind of talked about, but we are, or excuse me, knocked out, but we are going to see game 3 start off here with Ogerpon Iron Hands from Yuxiang and Iron Hands King Gambit from Mao.
No chance that the Landorus can switch in before the King Gambit this time, while the King Gambit's already on the field. So Mao already putting pressure onto Yuxiang's side of the field, and of course, with that ability for the King Gambit to go for the Fire Terror, like we saw in game 1, I think Mao's really kind of honing in on what worked and leaning into it. The Fake Out combination, Terra Fire on the King Gambit, plus maybe a Sword Stance, really sets up this King Gambit so well to be able to deal with the Ogerpon on Yuxiang's side of the field, deal with the Landorus that's kind of switching in and pivoting about, but also just making sure that with that Fire Terror, the Iron Hands on Yuxiang's side of the field isn't going to be able to do as much damage as it wants to.
And I really like this turn 1 from Mao here, going for that Terrestrialization, Fire, and Sword Stance on the King Gambit, kind of forcing Yuxiang to Fake Out and maybe go for a Sword Stance of their own or something like an Ivy Cudgel, just to kind of force position. We actually didn't get to see the speed interactions between these 2 Iron Hands yet, just because they've been on the field at different times. So we wouldn't know whose Fake Out is faster or guaranteed to be faster. We do see a Terrestrialization Fire, as said before, and a Sword Stance from the Ogerpon.
A Sword Stance looking like it's coming out a piece in this turn, and Drain Punch following up into the King Gambit. Still did quite a lot of damage, actually. I'm really impressed by that Drain Punch from the Iron Hands. Looks like it's been trained to hit a little bit harder. But now with that Landorus on the field, putting pressure onto the Iron Hands on Yuxiang's side of the field. And also, I wouldn't be surprised with the Black Glasses if the Sucker Punch was easily enough to pick up the knockout on Ogerpon on Yuxiang's side of the field as well. It feels like Mao's kind of pinned Yuxiang into a really tough spot.
Yeah, that Intimidate really paying dividends. But actually, yeah, at -1, Iron Hand's doing a lot more than I would have thought as well with Drain Punch. That's a decent amount of chip, with in combination of something even like a resisted Ivy Cudgel is still doing a lot of damage. Instead, we are going to see Yuxiang actually switch out the Iron Hands to get rid of that Intimidate drop into what I would think is the Iron Bundle here, just to threaten super effective damage. Mao hasn't revealed Gastrodon yet, so if Yuxiang does correctly call a Freeze Dry or a Hydro Pump into the King Gambit, you're doing a lot of damage. Spiky Shield also makes a lot of sense here, just so you don't get Sucker Punched or Kowtow cleaved.
And it looks like a Sucker Punch potentially failing in that... Oh, Kowtow Cleave maybe landing
Oh, and a Rock Slide!
Yeah, Rock Slide coming out on the switch into Iron Bundle. A really good lock-in there for Mao. And now the opportunity for King Gambit to go for a Sucker Punch on either of these targets is really crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. The Landorus is locked into that Rock Slide here, doing super effective damage to the Iron Bundle, but it is going to be outsped by it, so Mao has to kind of make the decision here. What do I switch in? Iron Hands makes a lot of sense, but, you know, Yuxiang can call that and go for a Hydro Pump, because if you freeze dry the Lando and you switch in Gastrodon, it's taking so much damage.
Yeah, it's like whether or not that Ogerpon goes for an attack or not is really impactful here. There's a temptation for the Ogerpon to just kind of keep on Sword Stance until Yuxiang can get into a position where he's got the fake out onto the field, and that's going to be what that Rillaboom's going to be coming in to do. And then to be able to attack with it. So, yeah, Landorus coming out there, not wanting to stand in front of that bundle for too long without sort of committing the Sucker Punch. And Gastrodon coming in to protect that King Gambit from a Water type move.
Yeah, and Yuxiang here going for the Terrestrialization Fire, getting that Ogerpon, another +1, saying that Landorus, you cannot intimidate me. I'm gonna Sword Stance. I'm gonna Terrestrialize. I'm gonna get my attack buffs, whether you like it or not. I'm gonna threaten so much damage into your team. And something like the Rillaboom switching in there for the Iron Bundle was really, really well played from Yuxiang. And this Cudgel going into the King Gambit, knocking it out with a critical hit.
Wow, that's a massive there for Yuxiang, correctly calling that Mao wouldn't risk the Sucker Punch into either slot for risk of another Sword Stance or maybe a Protect or a switch out from either slot. Instead, Mao commits the Kowtow Cleave and gets absolutely punished by that Ivy Cudgel.
And now it's looking rough for Mao, where before, if the King Gambit lived, something like the Kowtow Cleave was most likely knocking out the Ogerpon or even doing a lot of damage into the Iron Bundle, or now the Rillaboom slot. But now that the Rillaboom actually switched in for the Iron Bundle, you have the faster Fake Out compared to Iron Hands, or you could Grassy Glide into the Gastrodon very safely now that the Terrestrialization on the King Gambit is already spent.
Yeah, it's definitely looking difficult for Mao to get a real foothold in this position. I think the one thing that really helps is that the Landorus is on the field right now. One, getting the intake off, that's always going to be huge for this situation, but also getting the opportunity to threaten a Stomping Tantrum into the Ogerpon on Yuxiang's side of the field. I think Yuxiang's in a situation where they don't need to really overextend too much and worry about making a read here. I think the safe play is definitely faking out that Landorus and getting an Ivy Cudgel into that slot and not worrying what you're doing damage to. But if Yuxiang's able to, well, maybe goes for a little bit of an overproduction and Mao can call that, then this game can get flipped on its head very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to need the Landorus switch out here. Again, the Landorus now kind of realizing that they need to intimidate and preserve the Landorus to make sure that it's not fainting to any Ivy Cudgels and that it needs to threaten something like a Stomping Tantrum. We are going to see a Fake Out and an Ivy Cudgel, most likely into that Landorus slot, as you kind of correctly predicted before, doing so much damage to that Iron Hands. And a yawn there into the Rillaboom.
That yawn there could be the thing that gives Mao a little bit more space to breathe in this set, but with the Iron Hands coming out onto the field, yes, it can threaten the Fake Out. But both Yuxiang and Mao both have the ability to go for a Grassy Glide here into this Gastrodon. And the only way for Gastrodon to really carry on putting on that offensive pressure is to not protect this turn and go for another yawn. And I think Mao's in that sort of back foot situation where he's kind of got to go for it. Because if you just protect here and make sure that, the Rillaboom goes to sleep this turn, assuming that Yuxiang doesn't go for the switch out, then you're just going to run into problems next turn. So, yeah, I think Mao's got to take advantage of every single turn that he's got right now.
And we do see a Rillaboom switching out, saying, I'm not ready to go to sleep yet. We do see the Iron Hands come in here for a Fake Out next turn. Just, again, cycling out the double Fake Out. We see a lot of teams opt for Iron Hands or Rillaboom. Yuxiang opting for both, just so you can switch in and out and get Fake Out, Fake Out, Fake Out. This Landorus coming in as well, getting another Intimidate, but a Spiky Shield, very, very safe from Yuxiang here, covering for that yawn or covering for that potential Fake Out from Mao's side.
I think a really smart spiky shield there. I think that that Gastrodon probably locked into Yawn, although I must admit I did miss the move that it locked into. either way, no damage, no yawn onto Yuxiang's side of the field, and I think it's really clever there, bringing in the fake out, making sure that you can again be in this situation that we were in a couple of turns ago, where it was fake out plus an Ivy Cudger, and hey, yeah, okay, the Ivy Cudger was going to be a little bit weaker than it was a couple of turns ago because of those Intimidates that have been cycling around. But the Iron Hands in the back for Mao is not looking particularly healthy. And as soon as Mao doesn't have the opportunity to switch out again, Yuxiang's going to be able to launch grass-type moves into that Gastrodon much more easily.
And it's kind of a problem of Gastrodon, I think, as well, is because Yawn is a great move, but it's so passive at times that you're not doing anything back. So like this Earth Power actually does a decent chunk to the Iron Hands, more than I would have expected, making me regret everything I just said. But the Gastrodon is sitting on the field here, and as you said before, Yuxiang is able to just go for Fake Out, Ivy Cudgel, Protect, Switch, and if Mao is able to read that correctly and kind of predict what Yuxiang is doing, these very predictable, safe plays, Mao could get their way back into this game.
And I think the next turn, the thing that's going to be key is if that Iron Hands does switch out for the Rillaboom, maybe we see another Spiky Shield. But it's not. It's going to be a Grassy Glide, going to be knocking out that Landorus. Mao having any potential to switch out any more. Drain Punch going into that Gastrodon, just making sure that it's going to be able to survive easily another Earth Power and maybe another attack from that Landorus if it was able to go for it. And an Ice Beam trying to catch that Rillaboom on the switch, but Mao not getting the benefit of it as Iron Hands just sticks on the field and make sure that it's not going to be taking too much damage. Grassy terrain leaving as well kind of makes you think that's why Yuxiang didn't go for the Rillaboom in that slot, wanting to have the Grassy Glide for a little bit later on.
Yeah, and I think that was really well played by Yuxiang as well, realizing that